This graphing calculator video follows along with Roman numeral 1 on the graphing calculator worksheet. I will be showing keystrokes for the updated TI-84 calculators, those that have the most recent operating system. So let's look at some of the basic features of the TI-84. We'll begin with number 1, which asks us to convert 42 divided by 756 to both a decimal and simplified fraction. So we'll go ahead, I'll show you both ways. You could just type 42 divided by 756 and press enter, and it'll return the decimal. But the newest operating system with the TI-84 also gives you what I call a shortcut menu, where you can enter a fraction vertically. So if you'll look above your Y equals button, you'll see F1, and then above the window button is F2, and moving along you'll see F3 and F4. So these four keys are what I will refer to as your shortcut keys. And you'll access these shortcut menus by clicking on the alpha button. So try alpha and then F1. And you have your first shortcut menu. And this is your fraction shortcut menu. So we'll go ahead and press enter, choosing the very first one. And you'll notice now that your fraction is set up vertically, more similar to what you would see maybe on paper if you were writing out the fraction with paper and pencil. So now we can just type in 42. Then we use our arrows to arrow down and move to the denominator and type in 756. Now if I wanted to type something else here, I would need to arrow to the right if I were wanting to say add or subtract some additional values, and press enter. So now by using the fraction shortcut menu, it's also converted the fraction to a simplified fraction, which is 1 divided by 18. You'll notice that it didn't do that before for us, and that's because we did not use the fraction shortcut menu. Now, if you wanted to take this value and convert it to a decimal, then you would use your math key. So find your math key on the left-hand side. And then you'll notice that the second one here says decimal, so we can choose number 2. And the calculator screen will read ANS, which stands for answer, and it's going to convert our previous answer to a decimal. Press enter. And that's how we can return the decimal equivalent of this fraction. Let's go one more time and pretend like you did not use your fraction shortcut menu and you just entered 42 divided by 756. So when we press enter, we're going to get the decimal version of this fraction. And let's say we did want to go ahead and convert it to a simplified fraction. We could also do that using our math button. So go back to your math button. But this time, notice we'll choose number 1 because we'd like to convert our decimal to a fraction. So type number 1, enter, and it'll convert our previous answer to a simplified fraction. So you can convert from fractions to decimals, and then of course from decimals to fractions as well. And I'll go ahead and clear back to a clear screen. All right, moving on to number 2. We want to simplify 2 plus or minus the square root of 13 divided by 4. So notice this is a fraction, so let's go ahead and practice using that shortcut key, alpha, F1. Choose number 1. You can just press enter here. You don't actually have to type number 1, just press enter. And now we're going to enter 2 plus or minus the square root of 13 in the numerator. Now the TI-84s and 83s, they don't have a plus or minus button, so we'll have to put the addition separately from the subtraction. We'll basically have to do it twice. So the square root of 13, you'll have to find your square root button. You'll notice it's actually above the x squared button, so we'll have to use the second key. So second, and the square root of 13, we can just type in 13. Notice you don't have to have any parentheses here. And then you would arrow to the right to get out of the radical, and then arrow down to get to your denominator. So we wanted to divide that all by 4. 2 plus the square root of 13 divided by 4. Enter. So the decimal approximation for this would be approximately 1.40. Now we want to enter in 2 minus the square root of 13 divided by 4. So rather than typing the entire expression again, we can just ask the calculator to bring up our previous entry. So notice above your enter button here, it says entry. So if you go second, enter, it'll bring up our previous entry, and then we can arrow back and change anything we'd like to change. So we'll go ahead and arrow into the numerator and back it up. And we want to change this plus to a minus. I want this to be, instead of addition, we'd like it to be subtraction. So the cursor just needs to be on top of the addition sign, and then you can just type subtraction and it will replace that symbol, and then press enter. So our second value would be approximately negative 0.40. Now before I move on, let me show you another feature here. Let's use second entry once again and pull up this previous entry. And let's say instead of the square root of 13, I actually wanted this to be the square root of 123. Let's say I completely missed a digit. So it's not just simply needing to replace the 3 with another number, but I actually need to insert a number. So you have an insert feature on your calculator. It's right here above the delete key. It says INS. So let's use the insert feature. We would go ahead and arrow back. So the cursor is on top of the 3. We'll go second and insert. And let's say I wanted it to be 123, so I'll insert a 2. And you'll notice that I haven't simply replaced a digit, but I actually inserted an additional value. So that's how your insert button works. All right, let's go ahead and clear and move on to number 3. Number 3 says a student found solutions to the equation 6x squared minus 5x minus 4 equals 0 to be negative 1/2 and 4/3. And we want to use the store feature of the calculator to check these solutions. So the first solution is negative 1/2. So again, you could enter that as just negative 1 divided by 2. You could use your fraction shortcut menu if you wanted to, or even enter it as just negative 0.5. Now we want to store this value. So to the left side of your calculator, the lower left here, is your store button, STO. So click on store, and now you can store this number as any letter on the calculator. We could choose any variable, A, B, C, any letter in the alphabet. The easiest though to use is to go ahead and just store it as X, because we actually have an X button, a variable key here that says XT theta N. So let's go ahead and store it as X and press enter. So now every time I type X here on my home screen of the calculator is going to substitute negative 0.5 in for X. So now we're going to go ahead and type the left-hand side of the equation that we are trying to check, the 6x squared minus 5x minus 4. Remember that you have a button here that will square it for you. So 6x squared minus 5x minus 4. And we're hoping that this equation will equal 0. So you don't have to type in the equal 0, but rather you're going to press enter because the calculator is going to substitute in negative 0.5 for X and return our value. Now let's check the solution 4/3. So we'll type in 4/3. Again, if you wanted to use your shortcut menu, you certainly could go alpha, F1, and choose that way of entering 4/3. That's totally up to you. But we want to store, so again, we'll use our store key and we'll store it as X. Now this time, it'll just replace our previously stored value of negative 1/2 with the value 4/3. So press enter. And then typing in again the left-hand side of the equation that we're trying to check, 6x squared minus 5x minus 4, and hoping that this will equal 0. And indeed it does. All right, so let's move on to the very last question, number 4. Another equation we're trying to check, but this time the solutions are a little more complicated. 1 plus or minus the square root of 11. So we'll type 1 plus the square root of 11. And then again, I'll go ahead and arrow out of the radical just so that you can get in the habit of doing that. Store as x, press enter. And now type in the left-hand side of the equation we're trying to check. X squared minus 2x minus 10. Enter, hoping it equals 0, and it does. And now we can type 1 minus the square root of 11. Now notice we did have it typed up before as 1 plus the square root of 11. So if you did not want to type it again, you could go second entry. It'll pull up the previous entry, which is not the one that we want. If you hit second entry again, it'll just keep pulling up your previous entries. You can also arrow up. Notice if you wanted to continually arrow up to the entry that you were interested in, you can also use the arrows to arrow up and then press enter, and it would pull up that previous entry. I pressed enter twice, so let me do that again. So I could arrow up to the 1 plus the square root of 11, stored as x, press enter. It'll bring that entry back up for me, and then I can just arrow back and change the addition to subtraction. If I had something really lengthy that I didn't want to retype, that would be a time saver. And then once again, x squared minus 2x minus 10, and pressing enter, hoping that it will equal 0. And it does.